And so I was very fortunate to be on the first UK team in the first WRTC World Radiosport Team Championships in Seattle. Seattle would have been a great idea, wouldn't it? Seattle in 1990, and then I competed again in 2010 and in 2000 as well. So I was rather hoping there'd be one in 2020, so I could make it every 10 years. But the next one's going to be in Germany next year. Can you all hear me all right, by the way? Is that okay? Good. And feel free to ask any questions as we go through. So the next one's going to be in Germany next year, and for a long time I've been asked, well, could we run a World Radiosport Team Championship in the UK? And I always used to say, well, the Germans haven't done it with their legendary organisational abilities, and now they've taken up the mantle and they're going to be running it next year. But it's quite a challenge, as I'll try and show you. I was there in Boston, as well as the 3 times competing. I was there in Boston as an on-site referee, and also an on-site referee in 2002 in Helsinki, and it's a huge logistical challenge, and frankly the Germans need our help. So it'll be in part a plea for a little bit of support, both financial and perhaps particularly for German speakers, Nigel, in Germany, in the weeks and days leading up to the event and during the event, they need a lot of help. And I learned from Boston in 2014 that, the W1 area mainly, you'd think a lot of contesters and a lot of other contesters coming in from all over the States to help out. Nevertheless, they were struggling for resources for people to help them. So it's a huge logistical challenge. It's a challenge for me to say that. So let's go through, and that's the logo for the 2018 World Radiosport Team Championship. And this is the roadshow put together by the German organisers, and it's quite up to date with some recent additions. So excuse the some of the graphics perhaps, but so contester, are you a big gun? Or are you a little pistol? And WRTC attempts to see, well, okay, who's the best under identical conditions? And that's the whole point. It's as it were, the Olympics of radio sport, the Olympics of contesting. And the closest we get to it, I guess, is field day, something like that, where you're all 100 watts, antenna height limited, equipment, that sort of thing. But you're in different geographical locations. So, G4FNL Portable didn't win because GS2MP Portable, or whatever they were at the time, GM2MP Portable, had better propagation because they're in north of Scotland. So the whole concept in 1990 was, let's bring teams of 2 contesters representing different countries together in the same geographical location. And interestingly, in Seattle, they were mainly big contest stations that were being used, and they'd been fitted with attenuators, so they'd all been assessed as their relative capability, and there were stations with stacked monobanders on rotating towers. And they were given attenuators and all tried to level. The station that myself and Steve G3YDV had was actually one of the reserve stations, and it had a tri-bander on a flat roof on a sloping site, sloping to the east, and we thought we'd be dead because JA was up and over the other side of the hill. Particularly on the way to the site when we heard that they'd having problems with the attenuators, so the attenuators were all pulled. So we were competing against monobanders on a rotating tower, and we came 7th. So actually, it's about not just the station capability, but really, I'd say it was Helsinki 2002. It took 12 years before they really had serious attempts at levelling the playing field, where they had identical tri-banders, identical antenna height, and they'd done quite a lot of work on the different sites that they used to try and make it as level as possible. And I wasn't at the next one, but then in 2010 in Moscow, the Russians set a new standard, and they really did level the playing field. The mayor of a large area just outside of Moscow is a radio ham, keen contester, and he persuaded all the local farmers to make fields available, and the field that myself and Andy G4PIQ were in, you could see another station about half a mile over that way, another one half a mile over that way, and they're all laid out like that in the same sort of 10 or 20 kilometre radius, and we were competing on a level playing field. The people in Boston then took that to another level. They did a lot of site measurements, that sort of thing, and the Germans are taking this on. So that this is what they're doing, finding out the best contesters under these conditions. So, as I said, level playing field, 2 operators and 1 on-site referee. And I've been an on-site referee twice, in 2002 and again in 2014. and that's quite a challenge. Now, if you're an experienced contester, if you feel you can stay up for 24 hours, you can take 2 different audio streams, one in each ear for 24 hours. Stay awake, stay focused, monitoring what's happening, because this is the Olympics of contesting. There's got to be an element of refereeing. And the other thing that happens to you, of course, is Stockholm Syndrome, because you end up being very much on the side of your team. So in Boston, I was the referee for one of the Croatian teams, and I wanted my boys to win. I was totally on their side, but of course I'm there as a referee. But you bond very closely with your team. I'm not sure which team that would be. Looks like one of the German teams, and the referee in the red shirt in the middle would have been from a different country, and he's there to ensure that there's one of the challenges is you don't want, for example, the Lithuanian team having lots of Lithuanians coming on, the messages going around the cluster, just work these guys, and they're trying to avoid all of that to take out any of that unfairness. So the referee is partly there to make sure none of that happens, and there's also a little power meter to make sure they're not exceeding the 100-watt power limit. And they could, yes, 100 watts down the bottom there. They could have said same geographical area. So like I've said, you want a flat level area pretty much, and the area outside Boston was pretty much like that, and the Moscow was as well. And going back to Helsinki was the first time that was really done properly. Identical infrastructure. So it's been aluminium tri-banders in previous times. This time it's spider beams on spider beam pole, being a German product. And you get, I think, 2 or 3 coaxes coming in. You get the tri-bander, and you get dipoles for 40 and 80. So of course, triplexer technology came in really in 2010 in Moscow, and Andy and I used one of those. I built one to the 5B4 AGN design, and but everyone else you're competing against is using the same thing. We'll go through some more of the kit later. Here we are. So okay, rotary dipole on 40, that'll be mounted on the spider beam, fixed dipole on 80, 14 metre mast. Everyone gets the same tent, same generator. There'll be a spare generator and so forth, and sanitation is provided, though that's the least of your worries. And really, I think this slide just says it's a competition within a competition. So the IARU Radiosport contest happens that weekend, and this contest, the WRTC, happens within that, has its own rules, different multipliers. It'll be country multipliers rather than zones, but happening over the same time period. So qualification, this has evolved over the years. I mean, in 1990, the UK was invited to send a team. That was rather nice, and that persisted until at least 2002. Now there's qualification made up of a number of contests here with different point values, as you can see, weighting factors and so forth, and they instituted a spreadsheet and a display which shows you all the various qualification, and it's actually oriented towards the what is that? Yeah, okay, North America #1 area. I was just wondering why it had an LZ in there, but so USA split up into a number of areas, Europe split up into a number of areas, and qualifications are based on your performance in various contests in the preceding 3 years. So pretty much when WRTC 2018 ends, then I think in 2019 the next set of contests will start to count points for the qualification for the next one. And you can see the bottom down there that the WRTC.de is the website, and standings on there tells you where. So 49 teams get through qualification in those various areas around the world, and it's quite a challenge to split the areas up in a fair manner. So however you do it, it's always going to be a challenge. The defending champions, N6MJ, KL9A, they will be coming to defend their title, and they'll take some beating. 3 youth teams of under 25s. And 5 sponsored teams, that's buy your way in, as it were, but certain other criteria as well, and 5 wildcard teams, so 63 in total. So the Germans have to provide, you saw on the previous slide, 63 plus a few spares. I think they had 3 spares in Boston, so we can say 66 sets of that to provide for all the teams. It's quite a challenge. And 66 crews to man it, to site manager, people to put up the antennas, people to run errands, transport to from the site, referee, other people, a massive undertaking. This is just a reprise of the previous ones. There was a bit of a gap. It happened first in 1990, and the story I always tell is that UA1DZ was one of the top European contesters in those days, and G3FXB was the top British contester. G3FXB got to Leningrad, as it was then, and was desperate to meet UA1DZ, who'd been, the two of them been head-to-head in Europe in the contests for many years. Well, George UA1DZ worked for the government, and there was no way they could get him to meet G3FXB, a top contester from the UK. The best they could do was drive past, they couldn't stop, drive past the apartment block where George lived and point to all the antennas on the top of the apartment. That's George's antennas, but you can't meet him. 2 years later, I was in Seattle, I was able to shake hands with UA1DZ, because the Iron Curtain came down and these Russians came over, and it was the start of, well, not just détente, but the start of the breakup of the Soviet Union and the world we're in today. So it brought us together, and the WRTC was partly conceived, and you can see really from the west coast of the States, from the logo across to Russia, that was really what it was all about, but a lot of other countries were involved as well. It was a groundbreaking moment. They then had trouble finding some people to organise the next one, so that was in 1996, which I didn't go to. Anyone? Roger G3SXW was at that one, and Al was there as well. And then 2000, the Slovenians did an amazing job. I mean, S5, I feel so sorry for them, that very hard to send prefix on CW with all the dots, and yet they're one of the most active contest countries in Europe. So they did a wonderful job, but they were using mountaintop locations, existing contest sites, with tri-banders on a standard site mast, but they were on mountaintops. It's really hard to say, was this a level playing field? And as I said, Helsinki in 2002, that's when they really came into their own on that. Brazil, I know Don G3XTT was in Brazil. Anyone else? So that again, but because that was Southern Hemisphere and it was felt to be going down away from the top of the cycle, happy days, they had amplifiers there, ACOM 1010 amplifiers and a Beam on 40 as well. So it's huge, one individual put in a huge amount of money to make that happen. But those sites were not level. And then really the Russians in 2010 really brought it into a level playing field. Boston followed on from that, and now we have a very different logo from the Germans for next year. Contesting, well, I guess most of us in this room know what radio contesting is about, at least in part. This guy's taken it to a whole new level. N6MJ, who's one of the winners in 2014, and you may have seen some of you on the contest reflectors. He's been practicing SO2R, single up 2 radio, but running 2 pile-ups, one in each ear, and 2 keyboards. And he's been, and his partner in crime in the WRTC team, Chris KL9A, has been doing the same. So they go head-to-head each year in Seek Worldwide. But those two are an awesome team, and they're going to take some beating. So that's top contester there. And here are the podium winners from last time, success. So it's Chris and Dan in the middle, Josef and Rashto on the left, the Slovaks, and the Germans, who are actually 4th on claim score. What happens at the end of the contest, then people like, well, in the past, people like Don XTT and Dave K1ZZ, and helped by N6TR, they're the ones who process all the logs. The logs get processed in under 2 days so that the results can be announced, and they get to work. And originally the German pair were 4th, and on close checking, accuracy is what it's all about. So not just, it's your performance during the contest, but it's going to be judged afterwards. And they just moved. I can't remember who were in original 3rd claim place, but the Germans just snuck in ahead of them. So that's how tight it is. And I think the Germans, it had already more or less been sorted out that Germany was going to host the next competition anyway at that stage. Excuse me. Here are the boys in action. And yes, it's all about teamwork. Now, you can see just over on the right, the chair is empty, but the referee, that's where he would be sitting normally, and you have a long audio cable, and you sit between the two of them generally. He's probably just stretching his legs or maybe even taking the photo. I've got a similar photo of my boys, which I took from the side there. And that's a fairly neat setup actually there. Some of the stations had hardware everywhere. You've got to have, you know, bandpass filters and triplexer and various switching arrangements and so forth. That's actually a relatively neat setup, which is interesting. You know, I wonder how much that contributes to their success. But those two are machines. They're just fantastic operators. So this is from Boston. And this would be the warehouse for all the equipment. You can see the tower head units with the rotators mounted in there. Just a massive amount of logistics based on everything that we spoke about before. So there's an example. I don't know which station this is, but that might be the two Americans. But you see the massive wires there and the filters and God knows what else underneath the table. And of course you've got to transport all this. Wasn't too bad for those guys because they were continental USA, but this time it's going to be easier for the European teams. They can drive across Europe to Germany with all the kit in the car.
How much of their own kit do they provide?
Okay, yes. Okay, so you are provided with 3 coaxes and a rotator controller, but everything else you have to bring. Or, I mean, the organisers have said in the past that we can loan you radios, but I mean, this is top contest, so you really want to be bringing your own radio. When Andy and I did it in Moscow, I just bought a K3, aircraft K3, more or less specifically in order to take to Moscow. Andy opted to lug an FT1000MP along. But we had a mass of stuff, like we had 6-band Dune Stars and the triplexer I made, and a 6-pack, and so all of that had to go in the suitcases and go to Moscow with us. And of course what we did, I have a slide of it, not on this presentation, we made sure we got there and in the hotel, you know, 2 or 3 days before the competition, we made sure it all plugged together, and we'd already done dry runs, we'd already practiced in several contests, and we'd had an equipment list, make sure you don't leave anything at home, so all that sort of stuff. Yeah, I think you can see it, it looks like a 6-pack in the middle there in blue. You can probably see it better over there. So they've already done a number of dry runs. Spider Beam must have been working very hard to build 66 or so of these. This would be the standard Spider bit, one of the Spider Beams, but they need them in volume. They need them to be working. The crews that put them together, some of these people will never have done it before, so they've had practice runs already. And they've been on the air with this kit, evaluating the sites. They've done measurements and so forth, and some sites will have been changed if they find there's a particular problem. So a lot of work has been done already. And certainly what happened in Boston, and I imagine what happens this time as well, is that the deal is that amateurs can purchase the kit afterwards. In fact, the chap who looked after our site with the Croatians wasn't familiar with contesting, but I think he'd done a deal whereby, you know, he'd agreed to purchase the whole station at a good price, I'm sure, and so the part of the deal was that he was on site there looking after us. And when the contest finished, you know, my boys packed up all their stuff. I sent off the log, and the crew came along, took the mast down. In that case, a lattice mast with a gin pole, unbolted it all, and he had it on his trailer. And as we drove back to the contest hotel, he was driving away with his trailer full of a station, more or less everything he needed to go. But he wasn't a contester. You know, it's not like they had enough contesters in the Boston area to have people like that. But nevertheless, I think he learned a lot from it, and he got a cheap station at the end of it as well. So yeah, but Tony, they take all the radio stuff. And these days with 200-watt radios, that's one reason why the referee is there, and there's a little power meter, and it'll light up. It's a traffic light system. Amber means you're on the limit, and red, I as the referee would have to make a note of that and tell them to back off a bit. So that's what that's for. So lots of volunteering, lots of people needed to do these crew. There's a video somewhere of the guys in Boston, excuse me, doing their training, and because they're not as familiar. Well, it's not a gin pole; it's a misnomer, isn't it? It's a falling derrick, but they don't seem to use that very much in the States. So they were practicing how to put up masts with falling derrick. This time, of course, it's a spider pole. And as you saw on the previous slide, perhaps that's already guided, and it's a push-up arrangement. So I just hope they stay. Some people had problems with those slipping down, haven't they, in the Jubilee clips? So I hope they stay up for 48 for the time period. We'll have to see, but I'm sure the Germans have that covered. And yeah, it's not just for the boys. The two girls, there's a Papa 43 in the middle, but the two girls were the German team, Irina and Sandy, and they were one of the competitors in Boston 4 years ago. I'm not sure how many women teams there are this year, to be honest, or the next year, to be honest. And just really emphasising the fun nature of it. Chap over on the right, Tina Sugar 50 Alpha, is chairman of the sanctioning committee for WRTC, so there's an element of continuity from one competition to the next, and he will be involved in the arm twisting for whoever gets to do it in 2022. He was at the first WRTC in Seattle when, of course, he was on the Yugoslav team because it hadn't split in that time, so that was interesting. Some pictures of the main organising committee, and the key person is the one on the top left, Chris, DL1MGB, very well-known contester, putting a lot of work into this. He heads the organising committee, but he has a number of other people playing key roles there on the committee itself, and a number of these are the helpers in Germany. So they have people already engaged and working on various aspects of the project, and this gives you an idea of the sort of level of effort you need to run this thing. And there are a number of ambassadors around the world, of which I'm the one for the UK, promoting and fundraising and generally giving the idea of WRTC out in advance. And of course there'll be a lot of promotion in the lead up to the contest itself, because one thing the Institute, I think a couple of competitions ago, was improving the log checking process by not just using the logs that come in from the teams, but getting as many logs in from around the world as possible, put all that into the crunching process for the contest adjudication, which takes place immediately after the contest finishes, and that's been a huge element in improving the accuracy of the checking process. But I can remember even in Seattle 1990, which was paper logs. I've got a picture of me logging on paper with Steve. The LZ team started off in, I think, 3rd place, and they got bumped down to 6th in checking, and I think they decided to stop the checking process at that point. They'd gone a bit further, we might have gone above them as well and got 6th place. But anyway, so even back in the days of paper logs, you know, they were scrupulous about cross-checking the logs and verifying the contacts in there, and changes in place did occur as a result of that. So, where's it going to be? Well, Germany, I've said, and Wittenberg. Anyone tell me here what Wittenberg is famous for? Anyone?
Beer.
Oh, well, beer, yeah, not a bad suggestion, and I'm sure that's true. Wittenberg is actually where Martin Luther pinned the Declaration to the church door, so it has that historical background. And also very close to there was where the American and the American and the Russian armies met at the end of World War II. So a lot of history. It's immediately south of Berlin, and a flat area, so it's the level playing field that we want. There's a closer picture of it. So in a sort of triangle between Leipzig, Dresden and Berlin. That's where it'll take place, and they've selected the sites. They've been working on this, evaluating the sites. They've selected the sites with some spares, with some backups. There we are, and they've been doing field strength measurements and plots and all sorts of things like that. So doing a lot of work to establish a level playing field. Some more pictures there. And yeah, I mean, I've never been to Germany before. I went to Friedrichshafen last year, but there's a lot of tourists. Normally on the Monday, the teams, those who are sufficiently awake, can go on a tour around and see some of the local sites. And that's while the checkers are checking all the logs and getting everything ready for the announcement, which is, I think, Tuesday evening. You might have worked some of these already, DL0 WRTC, and there are various awards programs. This one, which you can work for. All of this is on the WRTC2018.de website, and a little payment for the award, which all goes in towards the pot to fund the whole thing. There's a film of Boston, and a book by Jim George, N3BB, which is a fictionalised account of events around WRTC 2014 called Contact Sport. So, it costs a lot of money. And there's a breakdown there. You can see that equipment, so all those masts and everything, I mean, they'll be sold off at some sort of price to recover some money, but there's a certain capital cost to that, and it's a big undertaking to host 66 teams. So they're actually approaching 80% of the funding needed. So there's still a need for funds, and that is part of the reason for my talk to you today. You'll see that individual sponsors make up 35% of that, sponsored teams and so forth. So the money has come from a number of sources. Broken down, and the Germans, it's their show. They've contributed, largely to this. And you go on the sponsor site on the website, and you can see call signs of everyone who's done the sponsor. And help is still wanted. You can be a corporate sponsor. So, any of you running a business here, you may wish to get involved, talk to the guys. I can give you contact. I have cards here. I also have these leaflets, which are not just about sponsorship. They tell you more about it generally, so please feel free to take any of these. And that's Chris, DL1MGB on the right there, and Scott W4PA, who runs Vibraplex and various other IRC, various other companies. He's a sponsor of the whole event. Yaesu, as you'll see from the top right, is the prime sponsor. All those companies involved, to a greater or lesser extent, DX Engineering have big input. Spider being, of course, massive this time. And Honda, they must be getting all the generators from Honda, I imagine. You can be a club sponsor. A lot of the German clubs, local clubs, DX clubs, have sponsored and provided money for this, and they're committed to making sure this is going to be a big success. And clubs around the world. And tent sponsors. Now, this idea came in Boston and was very successful. Paolo I2UIY was on the Italian team in Seattle. Fantastic character. And he then started the European sprint contests with a number of us who'd been in Seattle. And he's a great guy. He died several years ago. And there's Sandian Arena outside one of the tents that was... that particular tent was in Paolo's memory. So this is the list of the tent sponsors to date, and you'll see first of all Chiltern DX Club is listed there. So CDXC appealed for funds from its members and provided some funds, and we reached the €1,000 mark to sponsor a tent. So CDXC, I think you probably provided the material to them already, have you, Chris?
Yep.
Yeah. A picture and some blurb about the club, and if you click on CDXC on the tent sponsorship page, you'll see that out there. And the other one, if you see up top right there, Bob Carpenter G4BAH, who very sadly died just over a year ago. He was the guy behind the Mike 6 Tango contest station, and those of us who've been operating there collected money together again, and we reached €1,000, and so we have a tent sponsored in honour of Bob, and that will honour him, and there'll be a picture of him. If anyone has a good picture of G4BAH, I'd appreciate it, because we're struggling a bit for an acceptable picture to put on there. But well, I have one. It's not very high quality, so we'll see if we can find a better one. You can be an individual donor. These are all Germans, but I have one of these rather attractive tiles. And I think for €50, might be €100, you can get one of these, and they're dated. So this is a 2016. If I put a similar sum in again this year, I'll get one for 2017. If I put some more in, I'll get one for 2015. So you can collect 3 in total, hang those on the shack wall, little memento of your contribution to helping to make WRTC happen and helping to make a success of it. And your call sign also goes up on the website. Anyone spotted the busted call? There's a G out there. Someone who's here today, they haven't got his call sign right. You can look for that later. Back to the lump. So any donation counts. So if you'd like to contribute towards the success of this, help the Germans in this considerable effort, then please do. And the other thing you could do is become one of the volunteers. As I said, really, they're looking at the moment for German speakers, but it's not just Germans. If your German is reasonable, then and you know your way around the contesting scene, then I think they'd be very pleased to hear from you. you can contact me or contact the organisers directly. And down the bottom there, again, URL. There's a picture of mine. This is my boys from Croatia in 2014. Hrali 9A1XX and Davor 9A1UN. And I would normally be sitting in the middle between the two of them for 24 hours listening to two separate audio streams. And the awful thing, it is Stockholm Syndrome, you want your boys to win, but the awful thing is you're not allowed to put your hand on the radio. So you hear them bust a call or something like that. You can't say, hey, you got that wrong. In fact, you're supposed to write it down on a pad and give it to the adjudicators in case they have any questions. Now, I took that a little bit too literally, perhaps, in Helsinki. And I was very fortunate to be the on-site referee for N5TJ and K1TO, who had won twice before the previous two WRTCs. So they were looking at a third win in a row. And it happened that I was the on-site referee for them. And we drove towards the site, and as we rounded the corner to the site, one of them cursed under his breath because you could see the tri-bander on the mast there, but there was a great big hill to the east, which would be the direction of JA, and they thought they'd been stitched up. I don't think they'd been stitched up, but they certainly hadn't got one of the better sites. And nevertheless, they just did an incredible job, and they won for the third time in a row, at which point they retired. But I was sitting, rather than in the middle, like the way it worked out, I was sitting to the left of one of them. And I had this sort of pen and pad, and these are the best contesters in the world. But once or twice, I thought I heard them bust a call sign. So, I'd just make a note on my pad next to me. And then, of course, they sort of cottoned onto this. They, every time Dave writes something down, have we done something wrong? So I had to draw back a little bit. But no, that I don't think those notes were ever used by the adjudicators, but the guys did a fantastic effort. These guys did very well, and the concentration and the commitment. You can't, as a competitor, and I can say that with Andy, you can't enjoy it. You're meeting all these people, all these top contesters, but in the days leading up to the contest, you can't really enjoy it because you're so focused on not having too much to drink, which is probably myself and Roger's mistake in Slovenia. But you're just focusing totally on the contest. But once the contest is over, then you can relax and enjoy. But if you've been to a convention like this, or Friedrichshafen, or Dayton, or anything like that, to me as a contest, the great thing is that you've got this mental Supercheck partial list of all the people you've worked in contests over the years. You go to something like this, you actually meet the people. So it's open to anyone to come as a spectator, as a visitor. You don't have to be a volunteer help. If you don't speak good German, then you probably can't do that. Just come along, help out. I mean, you may have to stay some way away from there because all the accommodation will probably have been taken. But there's nothing to stop you coming and enjoying it. And if you can't do that, then do come on during that second weekend in July and help by being on the air and contributing to the fun of the contest. Those are your links there. It's on Twitter, Facebook, and the traditional web page. So do have a look if you haven't already. That's the end of my presentation. Any questions?
I thought that was quite. Am I there still?